Ever since the initial release of the first college football playoff rankings this year, there has been a nonstop argument over who should potentially get the last playoff spot if it comes down to Notre Dame versus Miami. And what's very controversial about the committee ranking Notre Dame right now ahead of Miami is that Miami has the head-to-head win. They beat Notre Dame 27-24 in week 1. And yes, head-to-head does matter. But head-to-head isn't the end-all be-all for who gets into the playoffs and who gets left out. Look, Miami beating Notre Dame matters, but so do the other 11 games that Miami has played, which is why they have been penalized for their losses to unranked Louisville and SMU. Notre Dame has been the better team throughout the entirety of this season than what Miami has. Miami was good in the first month of this year, and they've come up limping down the stretch in their last few games. And what's funny is, when you look at the committee's criteria for how they have gone about evaluating and watching these teams and how they rank them, they're not solely going off head-to-head. Head-to-head is just one metric to a bigger pool of data that they're pulling from with how they evaluate and rank these teams. Notre Dame also has had a stronger strength of schedule than Miami. I know it's hard to believe that, but Miami and Notre Dame share 4 common ACC opponents. As a matter of fact, Miami's 2 losses this year have come against the best ACC teams that they've played in Louisville and SMU. Everybody else that they played in this conference, minus NC State, has had a losing record. And Miami doesn't have a better quality win outside of their week 1 win over Notre Dame. Notre Dame has beaten USC, who still is in the fight for making it to the playoffs. They also beat Navy, who's been one of the best teams in the G5. They could end up winning the American. Miami's best win was beating a soulless and lifeless Florida State team on the road at the time when they were ranked. You also beat a USF team that lost to Navy, the same team that Notre Dame dominated. And let's not act like you weren't playing some jabronis on your schedule. You have Bethune-Cookman. No offense to all my HBCU grads out there that's tapped in with the pod, but Bethune-Cookman ain't nothing to write home about. You want a cookie for blowing out Bethune-Cookman? So if you ask me, Miami's schedule has been just as unimpressive as Notre Dame if you want to use the whole Notre Dame hasn't played anybody argument. And this is the argument that I love when people like to try to discredit Notre Dame. Anytime somebody's team has to go up against Notre Dame for a playoff spot, they love pulling out the Notre Dame should be in the conference argument. People only like to say Notre Dame needs to join the conference when it's convenient for making an argument for why their team should be in the playoffs in favor and over Notre Dame. People only criticize Notre Dame being independent when it favors their argument for why their team should be in. Only 4 or 5 teams that make it to the playoffs can win their conference championships. The other teams that are in it get at-large bids. So Notre Dame not being in the conference doesn't factor into anything when we're having the debate about if they should be rated higher, if they should even be in the playoffs over Miami. Just because Miami beat Notre Dame in week 1 doesn't erase the other 11 games. If we're putting teams in the playoffs based off head-to-head wins and we just forget the rest of the other 11 games, then Florida State should be in the playoffs over Alabama and SMU should be in the playoffs over Miami, since both of those 2 teams have the head-to-head, right? Head-to-head is just one metric in the bigger pool of data that is used to evaluate these teams. And Miami, from an eye test standpoint, hasn't been better than Notre Dame. Notre Dame has a complete team. They have one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the nation. They have the best 2-run punch, 1-2 punch in America at running back, and they have arguably the best defense in college football. Meanwhile, Miami has a good defense, but their offense is solely reliant on the true freshman wide receiver, that being Malachi Tony. When Malachi Tony get shut down, Miami's offense isn't the same. And you saw how bad Carson Beck can play at times against SMU when he threw that game away in overtime, when he threw a million interceptions against Louisville. I have no issue with the committee ranking Notre Dame ahead of Miami. Yes, head-to-head matters, but so do the other 11 games on the schedule, which is why the committee has penalized Miami for losing to SMU and Louisville. I'm not saying the games don't matter. The games do matter, which is why Miami is ranked behind Notre Dame, because one game doesn't define where you should be seated in the playoffs. It doesn't define the entirety of your season. There's a bigger body of work that you gotta have to continue to stay in the rankings the way Miami has fell. And Miami, at one point, they were a top 5 team, but ever since they had those 2 losses, they fell. That's what happens when you lose. When you continue to win, you stay high in the rankings. When you lose and you have another team that you beat ascending while you decent, then you end up being ranked behind them.